If you're sitting in a meeting today, right, and everyone around the table is just aggressively agreeing on a strategy.
Oh, yeah, the classic echo chamber.
Exactly. Like, nobody is pushing back. You might sit there and think, wow, I'm witnessing a highly successful team at work. But chances are, you aren't.
You're really not.
No. You are actually watching a system that is slowly starting to die. Because we tend to associate total alignment with productivity. But complete, unquestioned agreement, that's usually the very first indicator that a structure has stopped serving its original purpose.
Right. It stops adapting.
Yes, and it just starts demanding blind compliance instead. So today, we're doing a deep dive into the exact life cycle of how a perfectly functioning system eventually just, becomes a prison. And more importantly, we're looking at the specific type of person required to completely burn it down.
It is a totally fascinating trajectory to map out. I mean, the transition from a dynamic growing entity into this rigid, suffocating structure, it's something that happens in almost every human endeavor.
We see it everywhere.
Yeah.
Right.
Everywhere. We see it in massive multinational corporations, in government structures, in artistic movements, even in our own personal habits.
Oh, totally.
And what we are analyzing today from our sources is the anatomy of the person who just refuses to stay inside that structure.
Yeah.
The maverick, the disruptor. But we aren't just looking at historical biographies here.
Right. That would be a different kind of deep dive.
Exactly. We are decoding this process through a very specific lens. We're looking at the physical, tactile metaphors that the English language has adopted to describe the exact stages of rebellion.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the language we use to describe disruption isn't accidental at all. I mean, it pulls from these incredibly diverse fields. We're talking fine, woodworking, nautical survival, the Industrial Revolution.
Bronze casting.
Yes, bronze casting. And even scientific philosophy. By tracking how we literally speak about a rebel tearing apart a stagnant system, we get this blueprint for how reality actually gets reshaped.
It's a linguistic roadmap of destruction and creation.
It really is. But before we get to the destruction part, we have to look at what is actually being destroyed, right? We have to start with the stagnation itself.
Yeah, the baseline environment that necessitates a maverick in the first place.
Yeah.
Because if you look at the mechanics of building an empire, and that could be a literal historical empire, or, a dominant tech monopoly, or even just a dominant cultural trend, initial success, always requires a massive amount of coordination.
Right. Everyone has to be on the same page.
Precisely. Someone has a vision, and they build a system to execute it. In those early days, total obedience to the new rules is what brings triumph. The rules make sense because they are actively solving a very real problem.
Like the trains run on time, the product actually ships, the community thrives. It's this golden age of efficiency.
Exactly. It's a golden age. But, as time passes, the environment inevitably changes.
Right.
New technologies emerge, cultural appetites shift, the actual needs of the people evolve. Yet the system that was built during that golden age, it doesn't want to change.
It digs its heels in.
It absolutely does. It becomes entirely focused on enforcing the obedience that worked in the past. It completely confuses compliance with effectiveness. And that is the exact moment when an organization or a society becomes obsessed with following the rules simply for the sake of the rules.
It's like it develops this sort of organizational autoimmune disease. It starts attacking any new adaptive idea just to protect the old decaying structure.
That is a perfect way to describe it.
And that, that brings us to the birth of our protagonist. When the world stops moving forward, the maverick emerges. They look at these rigid, stagnant rules, and instead of conforming, they just decide to completely dismantle them. And we see this everywhere, don't we?
Oh, constantly.
It's the startup looking at a legacy industry with bloated prices and terrible customer service and deciding to build a completely different model. Or it's a controversial politician who completely ignores the established playbook of their party.
Refusing to play by the traditional rules of the establishment.
Exactly. Or, to bring it closer to home, it could even be you, the listener, looking at a career path that looks amazing on paper, but feels suffocating in reality, and you just decide to walk away.
Yeah, the scale of the rebellion is almost irrelevant compared to the underlying psychology of it. The maverick acts as the agent of change in a system that has fundamentally forgotten how to evolve. They are the friction that forces movement.
Wait, I want to challenge that framing for a second.
Sure, go ahead.
If human history is just this constant repeating cycle, building a system, watching it stagnate, and someone tearing it down, Isn't the maverick just as inevitable as the stagnation itself?
That's a huge philosophical question.
Right, like, are they actually a free-thinking rebel making this profound choice, or are they just a pressure valve that the machine was eventually going to trigger anyway?
Well, you've just hit on the core tension of historical determinism. Are they the architect of change or merely the instrument of a cycle? You could easily argue that stagnation naturally creates intense pressure. And, eventually that pressure must find a release.
It has to go somewhere.
Exactly. If it isn't this specific maverick, it will be another one a decade later. However, based on our source material, the exact form the disruption takes, the specific way a maverick chooses to dismantle the system, that requires immense personal agency.
So the when might be inevitable, but the how is up to them.
Yes, the overarching conditions for rebellion might be inevitable, but the actual art of the rebellion, the method, the timing, the vision, that is highly individual.
I can see that. The environment basically sets the stage, but the actor still has to choose to step onto it and, deliver the lines.
Right.
And what's fascinating is that this performance doesn't begin with some massive explosion. A true disruption doesn't start by burning down the building on day one. It starts incredibly quietly.
Almost invisibly.
Yes, often in total isolation. It starts with a single, very difficult physical choice.
Which brings us to the first physical metaphor in our linguistic analysis.
What?
Going against the grain. This phrase roots the beginning of rebellion firmly in the world of carpentry and fine woodworking.
I love this one. Think about the physical reality of a piece of wood, right? The grain is the arrangement of the wood fibers, and it literally maps the exact direction the tree was growing when it was alive.
It's basically the permanent structural history of that organism.
Exactly. And if you take a hand plane or a sander and you push it with the grain, working in harmony with those lines, it is this incredibly smooth, satisfying experience. The material cooperates, it takes almost no effort.
Because that represents the path of least resistance. It is the established societal norm. When you comply with a stagnant system, life is generally quite smooth. The friction is minimal.
But if you turn that tool around and you decide to cut against the grain, the physics of the interaction completely invert.
The wood fights back.
The wood aggressively fights back. The tool catches, the surface splinters, it chatters in your hands. It requires tremendous, exhausting physical strength to push through that friction. You have to literally force your will upon a material that is structurally designed to resist you.
And this perfectly captures the solitary nature of the maverick's initial phase. Choosing the unusual path is the equivalent of turning the tool against the grain. You are defying the natural expectations and the historical trajectory of your environment. And just like the wood, your environment splinters. It fights back. You face immediate, palpable resistance.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Let's ground this in a real scenario because the emotional toll here is, I think, wildly underestimated.
Oh, absolutely.
Take the classic example from the source text of someone born into a family with generations of established professionals, like a long line of doctors or lawyers, whatever it might be. The grain of that family ecosystem is set in stone.
The path is already carved out.
Right. The expectations are clear, the path is smooth if you just follow it. But this person, they decide they want to become a professional street artist.
A profound disruption of that microsystem.
Exactly. And making that choice isn't just a fun, quirky, aesthetic decision. It requires the raw emotional strength to endure the splintering of all those expectations. It's the friction of every single Thanksgiving dinner conversation.
Oh, the subtle digs.
The constant subtle suggestions that you should really get a real job. You have to push through the grain of your own life, and at this stage, you are doing it almost entirely alone. You aren't fighting a faceless corporation yet. You are fighting the material of your immediate surroundings.
And that isolation is the defining characteristic of this early friction. It is a massive test of internal resolve. Do you actually have the stamina to continuously apply force against a structure that wants you to stop? Because if you don't, the system simply absorbs your attempt and smooths itself out again.
It just heals over you.
Yes. But if you do have the stamina, and you push hard enough and long enough, you inevitably start making progress. And the moment you start making progress, you cease to be invisible.
Right. You transition from being a private annoyance to a public spectacle. And the people who are perfectly happy coasting along the smooth wood, they start to get very nervous.
Because you aren't just fighting the material anymore, you're fighting the bystanders.
Exactly. And this transition pulls us out of the carpenter's workshop and into two very distinct metaphors that illustrate exactly how the establishment reacts to a visible maverick.
The first reaction is deeply biological. It is the concept of ruffling feathers.
Right. So when you look at an elegant bird like hawk or swan, something poised and completely in control, its feathers lie perfectly flat against its body. It creates this aerodynamic, smooth silhouette.
Very sleek.
But when that bird is frightened or angry or feels its territories being encroached upon, it triggers an instant biological threat response. The bird violently shakes its body and all of those smooth feathers stand straight up. They puff up to artificially increase their size and look incredibly intimidating.
It is a defensive mechanism that is purposefully disguised as an offensive posture. And when we apply this to human authority figures or, the gatekeepers of a legacy system, the psychological mapping is exact. When a maverick's ideas gain traction, the people in charge feel their territory is threatened.
So they puff up.
Yes, they engage in bureaucratic puffery, they become irritated, they call unnecessary meetings, they send aggressively passive-aggressive memos.
Oh, the memos.
Right, they try to look as large and intimidating as possible to basically scare the maverick back into a smooth, compliant posture.
Think about a middle manager who is deeply entrenched in a legacy company. A new employee comes in and realizes that a process that currently takes 3 weeks could be automated to take 3 hours. So they start doing it. Productivity skyrockets. You would naturally think the company would be thrilled.
You would hope so.
But the middle manager's entire sense of worth, their entire fiefdom, is built on overseeing that 3-week process. The maverick hasn't just improved efficiency, they have directly threatened the manager's territorial relevance. So the manager's feathers get intensely ruffled.
You start citing protocol.
Exactly. Citing protocol, demanding oversight, basically trying to reestablish the smooth, unquestioned hierarchy.
What is critical to understand about ruffling feathers is that it implies a low-level, irritated disruption. The establishment is essentially saying, you are making us look bad, you are exposing our inefficiencies, and you are making us uncomfortable. Stop it.
Yeah, it is annoyance masked as authority.
But annoyance implies a certain level of safety.
Right?
The system still feels relatively secure.
Right, but what happens when the maverick ignores the puffed-up manager and just keeps pushing?
Then the stakes escalate dramatically. The reaction shifts from irritation to existential dread. And that shift is brilliantly captured in the phrase, rocking the boat.
This is one of the most vivid and frankly terrifying metaphors we have, and you really have to strip away the cliche and visualize the actual scenario to get it.
Paint the picture.
Imagine a small, incredibly fragile wooden rowboat. And it's not in a calm, sunny pond. It is in the middle of a deep, freezing, pitch-black lake.
Yeah.
There are 10 people in this boat, and the margin for error is absolute 0.
To keep that fragile system afloat, it relies on total, uncompromising obedience from every single passenger. Everyone must sit perfectly, rigidly still.
If even one person decides they are tired of sitting or, they want to see what's over the edge and they stand up or start swaying, the entire boat rocks violently.
We have to deeply analyze the psychology of the other 9 passengers here, because this is a profound shift from the ruffled feathers. When the maverick stands up in that boat, the demand for conformity from the group does not stem from malice.
Right.
It doesn't stem from a desire to exercise power or maintain a petty fiefdom like the manager. It stems from the primal, overwhelming terror of drowning.
Wow, that distinction changes everything. The coworkers, the peers, the family members, they aren't telling you to sit down because they hate your new idea. They are begging you to sit down because they genuinely believe your individual actions are going to capsize the entire structure and kill everybody.
Exactly. The stagnant system has brilliantly weaponized the group's fear. The system has convinced them that the only possible way to survive is absolute stillness. It creates this dynamic of forced complicity where individuals basically police each other out of a fear of collective ruin.
We see this constantly in corporate cultures that are secretly failing. Let's say a company's main product is slowly becoming obsolete, but the executives just refuse to pivot. One employee sees the writing on the wall and wants to radically shift the strategy.
A classic maverick move.
But the team around them, who also know the product is failing, by the way, they all have mortgages, they have kids in college, they're banking on their year-end bonuses. The group pressure completely silences the maverick. The peers are saying, please, just keep quiet, don't rock the boat right now, let's just make it through the next quarter.
It is loss aversion operating at a systemic scale. Humans are psychologically wired to prefer avoiding a loss over acquiring an equivalent gain. So the potential gain of the Maverick's new strategy is completely overshadowed by the immediate terror of losing the fragile safety of the rowboat.
But, I mean, doesn't the group have a point? If the boat actually tips over, they do drown. The Maverick might be a visionary, but if they bankrupt the company in the process of trying to save it, haven't they just destroyed everyone's livelihood? It feels incredibly selfish to stand up in that boat.
And that is the perpetual accusation against the disruptor, that their vision is just masked narcissism.
Right.
And sometimes, honestly, it is. But the Maverick's counter-argument is that the boat is already sinking. The deep lake is already seeping through the floorboards. The group is choosing the slow, quiet death of stagnation over the chaotic, volatile possibility of actually reaching the shore. The Maverick recognizes that staying still is a guaranteed failure, whereas rocking the boat introduces the possibility, however dangerous, of a new dynamic.
Look at the progression of the stakes here. We've gone from a piece of wood fighting back in an empty room to a bird puffing its feathers in a display of irritated authority, and now we have a group of terrified people screaming in the dark, policing each other out of sheer fear. The stakes of defiance are escalating wildly.
At this exact moment, the pressure to conform reaches its absolute maximum. The establishment and even the Maverick's own peers are applying immense psychological weight to force them back into a seated position.
But a true disruptor looks at that fragile system, looks at the water coming in, and decides that disturbing the peace isn't enough. They realize the system cannot be saved by standing up. It has to be actively dismantled. We are moving from passive friction and terrifying sways into premeditated destruction.
Yes, we enter the phase of active sabotage, the transition from a passive threat to a calculated strike against the machinery of the establishment. And the linguistic anchor for this is throwing a wrench in the works, or, as it originated in British English, throwing a spanner in the works.
To understand the weight of this, we really have to travel back to the 19th century Industrial Revolution. The sensory environment of this metaphor is just overwhelming. You are walking onto the floor of a massive factory. The heat is oppressive. The air is thick with oil and dust.
Very visceral.
And everywhere you look, there are giant spinning steel gears, massive conveyor belts, huge pistons firing in perfect, deafening rhythm. This is the works. It is the machine of the system, running exactly as designed, completely devoid of humanity, endlessly repeating the exact same motion.
It is the ultimate manifestation of total alignment and total stagnation. Efficiency prioritized over all else.
Now, picture a worker standing on that floor, a maverick. They are holding a solid, heavy, forged metal wrench, and they don't accidentally drop it. They take a wide stance, rear back, and aggressively hurl that heavy metal tool directly into the fastest spinning steel gears of the machine. The result is catastrophic.
It is violence against the system.
The clash of metal on metal is deafening. The teeth of the gears violently snap off, flying across the room. The massive belt seize up, the engine whines, drops in pitch, and then issues a terrifying screech as this massive, supposedly unstoppable machine is forced to a complete, violent, and total stop. Silence falls over the factory floor.
What's fascinating here is that we must highlight the sheer intentionality of this act. This is the crucial differentiator from the previous phases. Going against the grain is pushing through an existing resistance. Rocking the boat can often be the accidental byproduct of just trying to change position. But throwing a wrench into the works, that is a premeditated act of sabotage aimed precisely at the vulnerable heart of a smoothly running process.
It is a declaration of war. It's someone saying, I am no longer going to try and reform this machine from the inside. I am going to kill it.
Exactly. And we see this dynamic play out constantly in modern frameworks, albeit usually without the flying metal. Think of a whistleblower who leaks internal documents exposing a deeply corrupt practice within a major financial institution. They aren't trying to change the company culture. They're actively throwing a wrench into the revenue-generating machine, knowing full well it will cause a catastrophic halt to operations, massive signs, and widespread panic.
Or, in a less dramatic corporate setting, imagine a tech company that is perfectly on schedule to launch a massive new software update. The marketing is bought, the executives are ready to celebrate, the machine is humming, right?
Ready to go.
And then, 48 hours before launch, the Maverick in the cybersecurity department discovers a critical vulnerability. The executives want to patch it later, they want to keep the machine running, but the Maverick refuses to sign off, triggering an automatic regulatory hold. They throw a massive procedural wrench into the works. The launch is completely stopped, millions of dollars are delayed. The screech of the corporate gears grinding to a halt is deafening.
The executives view the wrench as an act of pure betrayal. But this brings us back to the morality of the maverick. Why destroy the machine? The establishment views the sabotage as evil, but the maverick views the wrench as the only available tool for salvation. Sometimes a system is so fundamentally toxic, or the trajectory is so inherently flawed, that you cannot simply tweak it. You cannot repair a spinning gear while the machine is running at full speed. The only way to fix it, or to replace it with something better, is to introduce a massive, catastrophic problem that forces it to shut down entirely.
So the destruction is a prerequisite for creation. You have to burn the field to plant new crops.
It is creative destruction in its purest form. By halting the machine, the maverick forces a pause. The factory floor is silent. And in that silence, in the empty space created by the sabotage, there is finally room to build something else.
But here is the ultimate challenge for the disruptor, I think. Once you stop the old machine and you start building your new vision, how do you prevent your brilliant new idea from just becoming the next factory? Like, how do you stop your innovation from slowly turning into the exact same stagnant, mass-produced system you just destroyed?
This is the existential trap of success, and it leads us to the fourth phase, irreplaceable excellence. The maverick must ensure their alternative doesn't just become a new set of rigid rules. The metaphor here pulls us out of the grimy mass production factory and into the high-heat, high-precision environment of a bronze casting foundry. The phrase is breaking the mold.
Let's talk about the mechanics of bronze casting, because the industrial implication here is the whole point of the metaphor. If you're manufacturing statues, you don't carve each one out of stone by hand. That takes way too long. You create a mold. It's a hollow container, usually made of reinforced clay or iron, that is the exact negative shape of the statue you want to make.
The mold is the ultimate tool of efficiency. It is a template for infinite replication.
Right. You heat up the liquid metal, you pour it into this hollow cavity, you wait for it to cool, you open it up, and boom, you have a perfect statue. You can use that same mold thousands of times. You will produce thousands of identical, completely unoriginal pieces. They all look exactly the same.
And the mold represents the new system that naturally forms after any period of creation. It is the genesis of the stagnation we discussed at the very beginning of this deep dive. The mold wants everything to be commodified, identical, and easily digestible.
But the maverick enters this foundry not as a factory worker looking for efficiency, but as a visionary. They pour the metal into a mold, but through some, alchemy of talent, timing, and vision, the statue that comes out is overwhelmingly beautiful. It is completely singular. It defies comprehension. It is a masterpiece.
It represents a level of excellence that the current market or society hasn't seen before.
And the artist looks at this masterpiece, and they look at the clay mold sitting on the table, and they realize a terrifying truth. If that mold continues to exist, someone else is going to come into this foundry tomorrow, melt down some cheap, inferior metal, pour it into the mold, and mass-produce cheap copies of this masterpiece.
That they recognize the profound danger of their own success. They see that their innovation is about to be commodified into a new baseline of mediocrity.
So what do? The moment the masterpiece is safe, the artist picks up a heavy iron hammer, and they violently smash the clay mold into a million pieces. They sweep the dust off the table. The means of replication are destroyed.
This step is philosophically massive. In the previous phase, with the wrench, the maverick was destroying the old system, the machine they hated. But here, the maverick is destroying the means of copying their own new excellence. They're refusing to let their innovation become the next factory standard.
They are guaranteeing to the universe that there will only ever be one of these. It can never be replicated.
It sets an unprecedented, impossible new standard. The idiom to break the mold in modern usage means to do something so completely revolutionary and unprecedented that it destroys the old standard and creates an entirely new category. It isn't just about being different. It is about being irreplicable.
Think about the music industry. It is basically a giant foundry trying to find a mold that works and then pouring as much cheap metal into it as possible. A boy band hits it big. Suddenly there are 20 identical boy bands.
Right, the formula.
The mold is mass-producing content, but then you get an artist like Miles Davis. He pioneers bebop, creates a masterpiece, and the industry tries to copy it. But before they can turn it into a stagnant formula, he completely abandons it and invents cool jazz.
He moves on.
Then he abandons that and invents modal jazz with Kind of Blue. Then he shatters that mold and pioneers jazz fusion. He was constantly smashing the mold of his own success because he refused to be mass-produced.
He was a serial mold breaker. And anyone who tried to do it exactly like him after the fact was just seen as a cheap imitation because the original parameters no longer existed. He didn't just play the game better, he continually destroyed the board.
So what does this all mean? How does this scale up? We are talking about one artist in a foundry or one musician in a studio. The impacts are profound in their fields. But how does a single broken mold affect the entire world? How do we move from artistic or corporate disruption into something that alters the fabric of human existence?
When a maverick successfully breaks the mold on a global systemic scale, it transcends any single industry. It alters the foundational architecture of reality. And this brings us to the fifth and final phase of the disruptor's journey, the ultimate disruption, the paradigm shift.
We are leaving the workshops and the factories behind and entering the realm of elite scientific philosophy. This isn't a phrase about tools or animals, it's about the limits of human perception.
Yes, the term paradigm shift was coined in 1962 by the American physicist and philosopher Thomas Kuhn in his deeply influential book, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. To understand the sheer gravity of this phase, we must precisely define what a paradigm actually is. A paradigm is not a rule book. It is not a strategy. It is the generally accepted framework, the foundational belief system, the invisible lens through which an entire society views reality during a specific era.
It is the water that the fish are swimming in. You don't even realize it's there because it just is reality. You don't question it. You just operate within it.
Exactly. The paradigm dictates what questions are even allowed to be asked. And history provides a flawless example of this, arguably the most famous paradigm shift in human history. For thousands of years, the absolute, unquestioned scientific, mathematical, and religious paradigm was that the Earth was the stationary center of the universe, the geocentric model. Everything, the sun, the stars, the planets, revolved around us.
And it's crucial to remember this wasn't just a quirky scientific theory. It was the absolute foundation of human ego. It informed theology, it informed philosophy, it informed how we viewed our place in the cosmos. The entire system of human thought, the grain of the wood, the design of the rowboat, the gears in the machine, all of it was built on the unshakable bedrock that we were the center of everything.
But then you have mavericks. Figures like Copernicus and later Galileo. They observe anomalies, they do the math, and they prove that this foundational, universally accepted belief is entirely false. They prove that the Earth is just another rock revolving around the sun.
Proving this wasn't just an update to the software. It wasn't a minor tweak to the rulebook. It was a massive conceptual earthquake. It shattered the very lens through which humanity viewed itself. Because if we are at the center of the universe, what else are we entirely wrong about? It upended theology, it rewrote physics, it changed celestial navigation. The old reality was deleted.
It was a literal shift in the paradigm. The old framework was completely dismantled, and a newly constructed framework replaced it. And this represents the ultimate evolution of the maverick.
Let's trace this entire arc because it is staggering when you look at it end to end. They started as an isolated individual, quietly feeling the exhausting friction of going against the grain.
Right.
They became visible and irritated the gatekeepers, ruffling the feathers of authority. They terrifyingly rocked the fragile boat of group consensus. They actively, violently sabotaged the stagnant machine by throwing a wrench in the works. They smashed the mold of their own success to remain irreplicable. And now, at the apex of this journey, they haven't just disturbed the peace, they have completely rewired how humanity perceives reality.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, and we look for a modern parallel to the Copernican revolution, we can look at technological or economic paradigm shifts. The invention of the smartphone is a frequent example in the source material. Before the smartphone, a phone was a stationary device tethered to a wall, used exclusively for synchronous auditory communication.
A completely different era.
The smartphone didn't just make the phone better, it caused a paradigm shift in the fundamental mechanics of human life. It rewired how we navigate physical space, how we consume information, how we date, how we work. The paradigm of separation between the digital and physical worlds collapsed.
You could argue the current global transition toward artificial intelligence is a real-time paradigm shift. We are moving from a reality where humans are the sole generators of cognitive output to a reality where cognition is a manufactured commodity. The maverick who triggers a shift of this magnitude doesn't just win the game. They literally invent a completely new game, burn the old rulebook in front of everyone, and force the entire planet to learn how to play on their terms.
It is the complete and total triumph of the disruptor. The life cycle concludes. The system that was once a suffocating cage has been utterly destroyed, and a vastly expanded, albeit chaotic, new universe has been opened up in its place.
The language we use to describe this is so potent. These idioms, going against the grain, rocking the boat, breaking the mold, they aren't just colorful phrases to throw into a PowerPoint presentation. They are the linguistic architecture of rebellion. When you understand the deep physical history behind these words, you realize they are tools. Whether you are navigating a stagnant corporate culture, trying to untangle a bureaucratic mess, or simply trying to articulate your own personal need to break out of a rut, mastering the psychology behind these metaphors gives you a roadmap for change.
And this brings us to the most important application of this entire analysis, the reflection back onto the listener. Following the source material's call to action, understanding the historical arc of the Maverick is only useful if you can identify where you currently reside within that life cycle.
I want you to think about your own history for a second. When was a time in your life that you made the incredibly difficult, isolating choice to go against the grain? When you pushed against the expectations of your family or your industry, did you find that people supported you, or did you find yourself inevitably ruffling feathers and terrifying the people in your rowboat? The friction you felt wasn't a sign that you were doing something wrong, it was the required physics of moving forward.
The resistance is the proof of velocity.
But I want to leave you with a more urgent, slightly provocative question. We've spent this entire deep dive analyzing how mavericks destroy the old to build the new. We've looked at the heroic, sweeping arcs of disruption. But look very closely at your own life right now, today.
Examine the structures around you.
Think back to that perfect, organized system we talked about at the very beginning. That beautiful, predictable structure that has slowly, quietly, almost invisibly become a cage. Are you currently sitting rigidly in a fragile rowboat, absolutely terrified of rocking the boat because the group has convinced you that any movement equals death, even though you know for a fact you are heading toward a waterfall? Or maybe you've already achieved some success. Are you looking at a beautiful, completely unoriginal statue in your life, a job, a routine, a creative output, realizing that you are just endlessly replicating a stagnant pattern, just waiting for the courage to pick up the hammer and break the mold?
The stagnant system relies on your silence. The choice between compliance and disruption is entirely yours.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Never be afraid to challenge the systems that try to define you, and we will see you next time.
We have this absolute cultural obsession with the person who kicks the door down.
Yeah.
You know, you see it in movies, you read it in history books, you hear it in the way we constantly talk about like business disruptors.
No, yeah, completely. It's everywhere.
Right. And there is this collective expectation that truly changing a massive industry or reshaping a power dynamic has to look like this big action sequence. Like we picture the ultimate rebel, the person just screaming at the old establishment.
Just tearing the whole system down.
Exactly. Physically tearing the entire system down to the studs and leaving the old ways in total smoking ruins. I mean, we are completely captivated by the explosion.
Well, it's incredibly cinematic, right? It grabs our attention immediately because the destruction is just so visceral and obvious. The source material we're looking at today categorizes this archetype perfectly. They call it the maverick.
The maverick, yeah.
And the maverick is loud, they are aggressive, rebellious, and totally unapologetic. I mean, their entire purpose is to shatter the status quo, and society genuinely loves to watch them do it because, well, it provides instant gratification.
Right, but when you actually step past that explosive opening act and look at the underlying mechanics of how lasting power is actually built, the explosive energy of the maverick suddenly looks, incredibly limited.
Oh, it is. It's totally limited.
Because the maverick can clear the lot, right, but they cannot build a house. That requires a profoundly different type of mind.
It is the absolute definition of a paradigm shift. So if you are joining us for this deep dive today, you are likely the kind of person who really wants to understand the hidden mechanics of the world. You know, the architecture beneath the surface.
We know you guys love getting into the weeds with us.
Exactly. So our mission today is to unpack the anatomy of a mastermind. We are looking at a highly specific set of advanced linguistic concepts and these really fascinating structural metaphors used to describe the minds that actually shape our reality. So we aren't focusing on the maverick today. We are deconstructing the strategist.
And the text makes this crucial, almost philosophical point right up front, which is that chaos is exhausting. I mean, you cannot simply destroy a system and leave it in ruins indefinitely.
People crave order.
They do. A world left in ruins by a maverick is just not functional for very long.
No, it isn't functional at all. I mean, the strategist is the necessary antidote to the maverick's chaos. So where the maverick operates with volume and aggression, the strategist operates with silence and immense patience.
They're the quiet ones in the room.
Right. They are calculating. They are the architects of the new reality. They don't just react to the rubble left behind, you know. They meticulously manipulate the environment, organize the scattered pieces, and completely outmaneuver everyone else.
Well, I want to push back on that relationship just a bit, or at least explore the friction there. Because if the maverick tears the old world down and the strategist builds the new one, do they actually rely on each other?
That's a great question.
I mean, does the strategist secretly need the maverick to go in there and create the chaos so they have a blank slate to work with? It feels like the strategist is almost weaponizing the maverick's noise to hide their own quiet construction.
That is a really brilliant way to frame the entire journey we are taking today, actually. Because the strategist absolutely thrives on the distraction that chaos provides.
Like a smokescreen.
Exactly like a smokescreen. While everyone is staring at the fire the maverick started, the strategist is quietly laying out the blueprints for the new empire. Their true genius lies in how they construct this new system without anyone noticing until it is completely finished and inescapable.
And to understand how they achieve this, we need to walk through the chronological construction of their master plan, utilizing the sophisticated vocabulary our sources have provided.
Right, because these terms are far more than just idioms. They are literal structural blueprints for amassing power.
So let's start at the literal ground level of that blueprint. Before anything visible can exist, you have to build a foundation. And the text pulls a massive physical metaphor from civil engineering to describe this initial stage of the mastermind's plan, which is laying the groundwork.
It's a concept that sounds kind of mundane, you know, until you examine the scale of the imagery the source provides. We aren't talking about building a garden shed here.
No, definitely not.
We are talking about constructing a 100-story skyscraper. You simply cannot pour concrete directly onto the grass and start building upward.
If you try that, the sheer weight of the ambition just collapses on itself. Soil shifts, the concrete cracks, and the whole thing comes down.
It's a disaster.
Yeah, and the text is very explicit about the literal violence and scale of what laying the groundwork actually entails. It requires digging a massive deep hole into the earth. It involves driving heavy steel beams into the bedrock.
And pouring thousands of tons of concrete deep into the dirt.
Right, just to stabilize the environment before a single visible floor is ever constructed.
The psychological weight of this metaphor rests entirely on the word invisible. This subterranean work is deeply, deeply unglamorous.
It's just mud and noise.
Exactly. It is completely hidden from the public eye. I mean, nobody walks past a chaotic construction site, peers down into a giant muddy hole in the ground, and applauds the beauty of the architecture.
They just complain about the traffic.
Right. They just see a hole, they see dirt, delay, and a total lack of tangible progress. But the strategist understands that without this invisible, grueling labor, the entire structure is doomed from the start.
And the sources provide two incredibly vivid, real-world examples of this invisible phase, and the primary one focuses on a startup company. According to the text, this startup existed for 3 full years and made absolutely zero money, not a single cent of profit.
Which is wild, because in the modern business environment, 3 years of zero profit usually signals total, irrecoverable failure to any outside observer.
Investors would be terrified.
Oh, investors panic, the media writes you off, and competitors completely ignore you. That 3-year period is the business equivalent of looking at that muddy, empty hole in the ground.
But the text reveals they weren't failing. They were strictly focused on laying the groundwork. So for 36 months, their equivalent of driving heavy steel beams into bedrock was exclusively building relationships with international suppliers.
They weren't even trying to sell a product yet.
No. They were traveling, negotiating, testing logistics, and securing supply chain guarantees that literally no one else had. They were stabilizing the soil so that when they finally did launch, they could scale to 100 stories without a single crack in their logistics.
We see the exact same principle applied from a different angle in the secondary example from the text's recap. This involves a company preparing to expand its operations into Europe.
Okay, right.
And a maverick would have just announced the expansion, thrown a massive launch party, generated a ton of aggressive PR, and, figured out the logistics later.
And they would have been absolutely destroyed by the regulatory environment.
Precisely. Instead, the strategist at the helm spent 2 full years quietly researching local tax laws across multiple European jurisdictions. 2 years.
Wow.
That means thousands of hours of tedious, mind-numbing legal analysis behind closed doors.
I can't even imagine the discipline that takes. I mean, you have shareholders demanding growth. You have competitors making bold moves. And your grand strategy is to sit in a windowless room for 2 years reading international tax codes.
It is the ultimate exercise in deferred gratification. There is no press release for reading tax law. It generates zero public excitement.
Zero.
But consider the alternative. If they had poured their corporate concrete on the grass, if they had launched the expansion without an ironclad understanding of the tax implications, the entire venture would have sunk into a swamp of legal penalties and international fines.
So the invisible groundwork was the only thing that made the eventual visible success possible. I think this is where it gets incredibly relevant for you listening right now. If you look at your own life, your career, or a project you are pouring your soul into, you might be in a phase where you are working exhaustingly hard, but seeing absolutely no immediate visible results.
It's so common.
It is so easy to internalize that as failure. You look at your peers who might be getting quick promotions or making flashy moves, and you feel like you are just digging in the dirt. But the lesson from the mastermind is that you aren't failing. You are stabilizing the soil. You are laying the groundwork.
And recognizing that invisibility does not equal inactivity is a massive psychological advantage. It really allows you to endure the boredom and the doubt that always accompany the early stages of a master plan.
So let's assume the hole is dug, the steel is driven, the concrete is poured, and the foundation is fully set. The soil is stable. But the moment you have something of substance built, even underground, you face an entirely new existential threat.
The threat of discovery.
Exactly. Because if you're secretly building this massive foundation and your rivals suddenly realize what you are constructing, the plan is compromised. They can sabotage the site, steal the blueprints, or just preempt your launch. So the strategist must pivot from construction to fierce protection.
Yeah.
They have to guard their information.
The vocabulary our sources introduce for this phase shifts the scene dramatically. We move away from the noise and dirt of civil engineering into the incredibly tense psychological environment of a smoky 19th century high-stakes poker game.
I love this imagery. The idiom the text dissects here is keeping your cards close to your chest. In this specific environment, information isn't just leverage. It is literal power and survival.
Because if the other players across the table see the cards in your hand, they don't just gain a competitive edge, they take your money. They destroy you.
Yeah, and the text conducts a deep analysis of the sheer physicality of this metaphor, which is crucial to understanding the strategist's mindset. Keeping your cards close to your chest is not merely a figure of speech for staying quiet.
No, it describes a literal, physical, defensive retraction.
It's true. A novice might hold their cards out over the middle of the table, maybe leaning back, completely unaware of the sight angles. But the master gambler physically pulls their hands back, presses the paper cards tightly against their own sternum, and only angles their neck down to take a private guarded peek.
It is a posture of absolute containment. Idiomatically, the text notes this represents a refusal to reveal your true plans, thoughts, or intentions until the absolute perfect moment of your choosing. You are sealing off all access to your internal calculus.
The business example the text provides highlights how difficult this is to maintain under pressure. So we have a CEO who is preparing to launch a revolutionary new product.
And the media is swarming.
Right. Journalists are begging for details, analysts are making wild speculations on TV, and investors are demanding a sneak peek. The pressure to just give them a little hint to tilt the cards just a millimeter away from her chest must have been immense.
But she absolutely refused to tell the media what the new product would be until launch day. She absorbed all that pressure, the speculation, and likely a ton of criticism, and revealed nothing.
We see the exact same containment strategy in the political example provided. And just to frame this for you, the listener, we are examining this purely through the lens of strategy, completely impartially. We're analyzing the mechanics of power here rather than the politics themselves.
Yeah, strictly the mechanics. So the text describes a senator who is cornered by the press and directly asked about her future political ambitions. Is she running for higher office? Is she planning some sort of takeover?
And a maverick would use that microphone to declare war, right? To aggressively state their ambitions and rally their base. Or they might defensively attack the reporter for even asking.
But the strategist does neither of those things. The text points out a brilliant tactical detail here. She simply smiled but kept her cards close to her chest.
That smile is so key.
A smile is an incredibly powerful tool for concealment. It acknowledges the question, it diffuses the tension, and it projects confidence, all while revealing absolutely zero actionable information to the opponent.
I have to ask about the internal toll this takes on a person, though. Keeping everything pressed so tightly to your chest, refusing to reveal your intentions until the perfect moment. Does that eventually make the strategist paranoid?
That's a fascinating point.
I mean, they have to constantly monitor everyone around them, ensuring no one gets a glimpse of the hand. It requires an almost suffocating level of emotional control. Most people really want to share their victories, especially if they just spent 3 years in the dirt laying the groundwork.
You are hitting on the central paradox of the mastermind here. The path of the strategist is inherently isolating. It requires staggering emotional discipline because you have to completely deny yourself the comfort of external validation.
Which is so hard to do.
Extremely hard. The maverick screams their intentions to the world because they desperately need the immediate roar of the crowd. The strategist has to swallow their pride, endure being misunderstood or underestimated, and carry the tension of the secret entirely alone.
Because the second you seek validation, you tilt the cards, the secret is out, and the advantage just vanishes.
Precisely. The perfect moment of revelation is entirely destroyed by the human need for premature validation. The strategist suppresses that need.
Okay, so the foundation is rock solid, and the secret is perfectly contained. The cards are pressed tight. But this creates a massive logistical nightmare for the strategist. If they're fiercely guarding their intentions, they can't exactly walk out into the open and start giving orders.
No, they can't.
They have to manipulate their environment and advance the master plan without ever showing their face or their hands. They have to do the dirty work from the shadows.
And this brings us directly to the concept the text calls the illusion of free will. To explain how this operates, the source material introduces a metaphor that is brilliantly evocative and honestly a little unsettling.
It is deeply creepy, in the best way possible. We leave the poker table and enter the world of classical European puppetry. The defining idiom for this phase is pulling the strings.
The visual contrast the text paints here is vital to understanding how covert power operates in the real world. It describes a classical marionette, a wooden puppet whose limbs and head are attached to incredibly thin, essentially invisible strings.
If you sit in the audience, your attention is entirely monopolized by the brightly lit stage. You are watching this wooden figure dance, fight, interact with props, and seemingly live a vibrant, autonomous life.
The lights are blinding, the action is captivating, and you get completely lost in the narrative happening right in front of you.
But the text forces us to look away from the stage and peer into the pitch-black rafters high above. Hidden completely in the dark, entirely unseen by the captivated audience, is the puppet master.
And this is where the source material zeroes in on the most chilling aspect of the metaphor. The puppet has zero free will. None.
It's all an illusion.
Totally. The audience is utterly fooled by the spectacle, believing they're watching an organic sequence of events. But the reality is that the puppet master, operating entirely in the shadows, is physically dictating every single movement, every dance step, and every fight.
Idiomatically, the text translates this as secretly controlling a complex situation, a vast organization, or a group of people from behind the scenes using hidden influence.
The source material provides two incredible examples that highlight the massive difference between a false front and true power. The first example looks at a city government. For years, the public genuinely believed the young, charismatic mayor was in charge of the city.
He's the one standing on the brightly lit stage, right? Making the impassioned speeches, cutting the ribbons, and shaking hands.
Exactly. He's the marionette. He provides the visible action that keeps the audience distracted.
Because the text reveals that a wealthy billionaire was the one actually running the city, pulling the strings from the dark rafters. The billionaire didn't want the scrutiny of public office. They didn't want to be asked questions by the press.
Too much friction.
Right. They wanted the power without the friction, so they let the mayor take the spotlight and the criticism while they quietly dictated the policy outcomes from behind closed doors.
The recap section of the source provides another structural parallel that happens constantly in the corporate world. An official committee is formed to make major decisions. This committee makes all the public announcements, they issue the glossy press releases, and they hold the town hall meetings. They occupy the brightly lit stage.
But anyone who actually understands the anatomy of the company knows the committee is just a wooden puppet. The investors, The people holding the capital are the ones pulling the strings.
The committee only announces what the investors have already secretly decided in the dark.
The cognitive dissonance here is fascinating, though. The public generally prefers to believe the brightly lit stage is reality because it's simple and comforting.
It is. Acknowledging the dark rafters requires accepting that the world is vastly more manipulated than it appears. The strategist weaponizes this cognitive bias. They know that as long as they provide a convincing show on the stage, nobody will bother to look up into the dark.
This is such a profound takeaway for you as a listener. Think about your own workplace, your industry, or even your local community. When a major decision comes down or a sudden shift happens, are you just staring at the brightly lit stage? Are you taking the official committee, the charismatic spokesperson, or the young mayor at face value?
Most people do.
Or have you trained yourself to look past the glare of the lights, peer up into the dark rafters, and look for the thin, invisible strings to see who actually benefits from the movement?
It requires a fundamental shift in perception. If you want to navigate the world effectively, you must learn to identify the puppet masters, not just the puppets.
But let's be realistic for a second. Navigating the dark, pulling these strings, and maintaining absolute secrecy for years on end is going to result in friction. The master plan is not going to execute flawlessly every single day.
No plan survives contact with reality completely intact.
Exactly. Strings get tangled, puppets break. There will be lost battles, financial hits, and humiliating setbacks. How does the strategist survive these moments without breaking character, panicking, throwing their cards on the table, and ruining the entire illusion?
They survive because they operate on a completely different temporal frequency than the rest of us. They fundamentally alter how they perceive time and success. The text introduces an idiom born from economics and grand strategy, which is playing the long game.
And the source makes a very bold assertion here, claiming that playing the long game goes entirely against human biology.
It absolutely does. The text highlights a profound psychological hurdle, which is that humans are deeply wired for instant gratification. Evolutionarily, we prioritize immediate survival and immediate rewards.
We want food now, safety now.
Right. And socially, we are conditioned by a hyper-connected world to demand instantaneous feedback. We want to win the argument today. We want the quarterly profit today. We want the social media dopamine hit right this second.
If we don't get the reward immediately, we feel like we are failing.
But the strategist's true superpower is their willingness to absorb short-term pain. They will gladly lose a fierce argument today, suffer a significant financial loss tomorrow, and endure public humiliation next week if those localized losses guarantee their ultimate dominance 10 years in the future.
They are essentially sacrificing short-term comfort for long-term invincibility. The text gives us two really powerful examples of how this temporal distortion works in practice. The first is on an individual career level. The text describes an individual who intentionally accepted a significantly lower-paying job at a tech company.
To any outside observer, to a maverick, certainly, that looks like an unforced error. Why would you willingly take less money? That is losing today. That is a failure of instant gratification.
But the individual didn't care about the immediate salary. They took the job specifically to gain daily, unfettered access to the brilliant engineers working at that firm.
They were networking in the mud.
Exactly. They spend years quietly absorbing knowledge, mapping out the talent, and building a subterranean network. They were playing the long game so they could eventually leave, start their own rival firm, and recruit the very talent they had been quietly observing. They bought a future empire by accepting a lower salary today.
The source scales this concept up to a macro level to demonstrate its versatility. It cites the example of a government choosing to invest heavily in renewable energy infrastructure. The text explicitly points out that this is not profitable in the current moment. It is a massive, painful expense.
It's a huge drain on the budget, and politically, it might be incredibly unpopular. Constituents might be screaming about the cost today.
But the architects of that policy are playing the long game. They are choosing to absorb the immediate financial pain and the political outrage now because they are calculating a permanent success, total energy independence and sustainability decades down the line. They are managing the future, not the present.
I really want to pause and emphasize how incredibly difficult this is. The text says you have to ignore temporary setbacks, but let's talk about the reality of that. How agonizing is it to look your family in the eye and say you are taking a massive pay cut for a prize you won't see for 10 years?
It's brutal.
Or to be a politician getting crushed in the polls today for a policy that won't pay off until long after you leave office. 10 years is a lifetime. What if the industry changes in year 7? What if the master plan fails in year 9?
The emotional toll is staggering, which is exactly why true masterminds are rare. It requires an almost pathological level of conviction in the invisible groundwork you laid back in the first phase.
Because most people would just quit.
The vast majority of people abandon the long game because the psychological pain of losing today simply becomes too sharp to bear. The strategist survives because they reframe the narrative. They do not view today's loss as a failure. They view it as a necessary, calculated purchase price for tomorrow's victory.
They are buying the future with today's bruises. And because the strategist is mentally operating a decade in the future, it creates a deeply disorienting dynamic for anyone trying to compete with them. Which brings us to the next structural component of the mastermind: temporal dominance.
Right, because the strategist is playing the long game. Their rivals, who remain entirely addicted to instant gratification, are constantly trapped in a cycle of confusion. This permanent state of confusion gives the strategist an insurmountable tactical advantage. The text refers to this state as being one step ahead.
To illustrate this, the text moves away from economics and places us inside a deeply physical metaphor of anticipation and pursuit: a maze.
Imagine two individuals running through a sprawling, complex maze. The pursuer is relying entirely on evidence and reaction. They run down a corridor, they look at the dirt, they see the footprints of their prey veering off to the left, and so they react.
They pivot and run left as fast as they can, thinking they are closing the gap.
But the strategist, who is the prey in this scenario, is not reacting to anything. That is the fundamental difference. They aren't looking at footprints. The text emphasizes that they are predicting.
They already knew.
They already knew, based on the layout of the maze and the psychology of the pursuer, that the pursuer would inevitably turn left.
This represents the crucial transition from being a reactive player to a predictive mastermind. The strategist doesn't maintain their advantage by simply running faster or sweating more than their opponent. Because they mathematically knew the pursuer would turn left, they placed a trap in that exact corridor yesterday.
It has to be incredibly demoralizing for the pursuer. They think they are being clever, they think they're finally catching up, and the moment they turn the corner, they run headfirst into a snare that was set before the chase even began.
The text underlines that the strategist is physically and mentally always one footstep in front of their enemy's thought process.
We see this translated into the corporate world perfectly through the text's example of a specific marketing team. This team doesn't just react to the market. They accurately predict every single campaign launched by their primary rival.
So no matter what new angle the rival tries, the strategist team already has a counter-campaign waiting, completely neutralizing the rival's momentum the second they launch.
And the technology example provided is perhaps the purest distillation of this concept. A brilliant cybersecurity expert who anticipates systemic vulnerabilities before they are ever exploited.
They are consistently outsmarting global hackers, not by scrambling to react to a massive data breach, but by quietly patching the vulnerability before the hacker even realizes the backdoor exists.
The invisible victories of being one step ahead are always the most potent. The battles are won before the opponent even realizes a war has started.
So, if you apply this to your own challenges, whether dealing with a difficult negotiation, a competitive market, or just navigating complex relationships, the lesson is profound. Being one step ahead is not about sheer effort. It's not about working 90-hour weeks or trying to outrun your problems.
It is about arriving at the destination yesterday.
Setting the table and quietly waiting for the problem to show up. It is the evolution from reacting to what just happened to predicting what must inevitably happen next.
And when you successfully reach that state of temporal dominance, the master plan is essentially complete. The foundation is poured, the secret is secured, the strings are attached, the long game has been endured, and the traps are set.
The enemy is trapped in the maze.
Which means it is time to end the game.
It is time for the execution of the final move. The source material defines this ultimate action as a masterstroke.
I love how the imagery evolves throughout this text. We started in the dirty, violent mud of a construction site. We navigated the smoky paranoia of a 19th century casino, crept through the pitch-black rafters of a marionette theater, and now, for the finale, the text elevates the imagery into the breathtaking world of classical fine art.
The vividness of the metaphor here is meant to convey sheer awe. Imagine a master painter who has been standing in front of a massive, imposing canvas for months. They have been quietly mixing complex colors, meticulously creating the background, layering the textures.
This represents all the agonizing, invisible groundwork we discuss.
The painting as it stands is good, It's solid work, but the text explicitly notes that it is missing something vital. It lacks genius.
Then comes the moment of execution, the sudden, violent beauty of the final action. The master takes a brush, dips it into pure liquid gold paint, and with one single brilliant, flawless slash across the canvas, the entire piece is instantly transformed.
It goes from being a good painting to a priceless, historic masterpiece in a fraction of a second. The text defines a masterstroke idiomatically as a remarkably skillful, brilliant, and perfectly timed action or decision.
It is the move that instantly guarantees total success, leaving rivals paralyzed and everyone else in absolute awe.
The defining characteristic here is finality. It does not yield a partial victory. It guarantees total, absolute success.
The strategic business example the text provides perfectly captures this finality. A board of directors successfully executes the acquisition of their biggest competitor right before a massive economic boom.
The timing is the genius of the stroke. If they had attempted the acquisition during the economic boom, the competitor's valuation would have been vastly inflated, making it too expensive.
And if they had done it during a severe recession, the debt load might have bankrupted both of them.
But executing it precisely at the inflection point, right before the market explodes, that is a masterstroke. They absorb the competitor cheaply and then ride the boom to exponential profits.
The entertainment example the text includes is just as brilliant. The decision by a studio to bypass traditional theaters entirely and release a highly anticipated movie directly to streaming platforms during a major holiday weekend.
They perfectly timed the release for when the entire target demographic is physically trapped at home on their couches looking for entertainment. It results in complete, immediate dominance of the audience's attention.
But I need to challenge the premise of the masterstroke just a bit.
Okay, lay it on me.
The text emphasizes that it is a brilliant action that guarantees total success. Is it possible for a masterstroke to happen by accident?
Like a fluke.
Yeah. Could a maverick, in a moment of chaotic panic, just throw a bucket of gold paint at a canvas and accidentally create a masterpiece? Or does an action only qualify as a true masterstroke if all the quiet, agonizing groundwork from the previous 5 phases was meticulously laid first?
That distinction is the entire thesis of the mastermind architecture. A lucky accident is merely luck. A maverick might experience a fortunate coincidence, but they cannot replicate it. The anatomy of absolute genius requires intent.
It has to be deliberate?
The golden flash of a masterstroke is entirely meaningless. It's just a mess of paint. If the massive canvas wasn't painstakingly prepared with the correct background colors for months beforehand. The final move only paralyzes the opponent because of the invisible groundwork, the fiercely hidden cards, the invisible strings, and the grueling long game that preceded it.
The masterstroke is just the moment the trap finally snaps shut.
That is an incredible synthesis. It really puts the entire journey into perspective.
By deconstructing these specific concepts, we have essentially decoded the anatomy of how power is actually wielded based on our source texts. To navigate the modern world effectively, it is simply not enough to watch the bright, explosive events.
You must cultivate a perceptive mind.
You must train yourself to identify who is actually pulling the strings from the dark rafters above the stage. You have to recognize who is willingly absorbing today's losses because they are executing a 10-year-long game. You have to appreciate the quiet individuals who are currently covered in dirt, laying the invisible groundwork for a structure no one else can see yet.
Understanding this sophisticated vocabulary doesn't just improve your linguistic comprehension. It fundamentally alters your ability to perceive strategy, manipulation, and power in real time.
It elevates you from being a spectator in the audience to someone who understands how the theater was built.
So I want to turn this directly to you listening right now. I want to echo the prompts from our source material and ask you to rigorously reflect on your own experiences. When have you been forced to play the long game? Have you ever taken a massive short-term loss, swallowed your pride when everyone else doubted you, and waited years for a payoff?
Did that agonizing patience eventually yield the victory you calculated?
Or perhaps you have been on the observing end of this architecture. Have you ever witnessed a true masterstroke in your industry, in your company, or even in a historical context? A move so perfectly timed, so brilliantly orchestrated, that it left you completely amazed by the intellect behind it.
It is genuinely incredible to think about the invisible architecture operating all around us every single day.
We started this deep dive talking about the maverick, the explosive desire to tear down the old system and leave it in cinematic ruins. But we've realized that true lasting power is never found in the destruction. True power resides in the quiet, agonizingly patient, invisible construction of the new reality.
The strategist is the one who actually builds the world, precisely because everyone else is too distracted by the noise to stop them.
But before we sign off, I want to leave you with one final, deeply provocative thought to mull over. Building strictly on the metaphors we've unpacked today, we firmly established that a strategist's immense, almost godlike power comes entirely from operating in the shadows.
It's all about remaining unseen.
Their success relies on laying foundations deep underground where no one can see them, keeping their cards fiercely pressed against their chest and pulling the marionette strings from the pitch-black rafters. But consider this. If the entirety of their tactical advantage relies on remaining unseen, what happens to the mastermind the exact moment someone turns on the lights?
Does the all-powerful puppet master instantly lose all their control the second the audience simply stops staring at the brightly lit stage and decides to look up?
Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive. Keep questioning the visible world, keep your cards close to your chest, and we will catch you next time.